Modern Final Fantasy XIV dungeon design strikes again, and this time it has hit one of, if not quite possibly, the most notorious dungeon in all of Final Fantasy XIV. Aurum Vale will never be the same. Hello, everybody. It's your boy Jmulls, and they de-gooed my room? If there's one word I could use to describe Aurum Vale now, it would be homogenized. It feels basically like every other Final Fantasy XIV dungeon. Some people won't necessarily mind that. I don't particularly like that direction. And I think for a dungeon that was always known for its uniqueness and its difficulty, it's a bit sad to see. It was almost like a rite of passage, especially for tanks, as it was really one of the first big difficulty jumps because you had to actually plan how many mobs to really pull. It's very easy, or at least was, to overpull in that first room. You had to manage positioning and also make sure no one else was accidentally going to pull something that could easily overwhelm you, especially with how limited your rotations were and how limited your actual survival kit was at level 49. Now, I did Aurum Vale recently on Gunbreaker, and nothing really ever felt threatening at all. Now, granted, I have tanked this dungeon adequately well before, so I knew roughly how much to pull, but even then, when I did overpull just to test things out, I was never really that much in danger, like at all. You'd probably chalk it up to the healer being pretty good as well, but at the same time, I remember the old years of Aurum Vale. It never really mattered how good your healer was. Sometimes the damage was just that insane. But that is really not the case anymore. So what did they really do? Well, the first room had a significant reduction in poison pools, which means you have way more real estate to work with when you want to actually pull various mobs and also where to put those mobs so you don't overpull. It is way more comfortable in that way. Even though mobs are still kind of close together, just having all that more real estate to work with makes it far easier to navigate around overpulling mobs. I feel like a lot in this dungeon also just had significant HP reduction because things just died quickly. I remember the adrenaline that used to flow through my veins, being a little bit hyperbolic there, but still, when we used to get to the seed room, trying to destroy all the seeds before they could all hatch and sometimes not making it, and then you have to deal with a whole bunch more mobs and all that. Yeah, they died in like 2 hits, I felt like, maybe 3, and the only pack of seeds that actually sprouted into actual mobs was the very last one because they were tucked away in a corner and no one really saw it. And while a lot of the memes of old Aurum Vale really come from that first room, for me there was another room that gave me almost more trouble historically than that first room, and it's the room leading up to the Coincounter with the scorpions. For some reason, I used to always struggle in this room, and the scorpions would sometimes overwhelm me or I would accidentally overpull. Didn't matter here, they just all kind of died. Maybe I'm just a better player, but I'm also really rusty because I haven't played like 24/7 for Final Fantasy XIV in a little bit here. Granted, it's still a level 48 dungeon, but like I said before, nothing was really a threat here at all. But now let's move on to the actual bosses. The first one being good old Locksmith. I set out a challenge for myself, and that was to not eat any fruit in this dungeon. I didn't have to eat any. The poison was never an issue. It could be a combination of me being a tank, but also these bosses just die like relatively quickly to where it doesn't ever really become an issue. And I never got like high enough stacks of poison to where it was actually a threat. And that goes not only for this fight, but also the final boss. The fruit is still around the room and you can eat it if you really want to, but when the boss is this squishy, it's kind of just better in my opinion to just rush down the boss and be done with it. I didn't even have to eat fruit afterwards because my debuff, like that poison, would just go off me. Maybe healers got buffed and I just wasn't aware of this because I don't play healer, but I really just don't think that's the case. So Locksmith ended up like being very forgettable as opposed to what he used to be, which was a boss that I still remember to this day. There's a certain cool element of that version of the fight all those years ago where it just kind of ramp up and you had to like manage when to eat fruit. I kind of liked that. In fact, I really did like it. I always loved the bosses in Aurum Vale. And then we get the Coincounter, and I don't think they really changed this guy all that much. Like, maybe he's a little bit more squishy, sure, but they changed him a while ago to where his attacks, well, would actually show you where they would affect. And ever since that change, I've never struggled with this guy at all. And I still didn't struggle with this guy. He just kind of dodged the AoEs, job done. Like, my only role as a tank was to really face him away from everyone else so they didn't have to do anything, just could stand there doing damage. But yeah, they changed this guy a while back, so I didn't really notice any changes to him here. And then we get to Miser's Mistress, the final boss of Aurum Vale. Again, there was an element to this fight that I truly appreciated in its earlier iterations, to where it got hectic as the fight went on. You were managing its various mechanics, trying not to get debuffed to like Kingdom Come, because seriously, if you got hit with all those debuffs, my god, you felt like you were neutered, like a puppy straight from the vet. And as the fight went on, and as more and more people kept eating mobile fruit, when you got to those final bits of the fight and there was no more mobile fruit, it became this like high tension race just to beat him before he beat you. And when you make the boss so really piss easy, you lose that sense of tension and the fight just becomes a glorified health sponge. I never really had to mind the burrs either. Like, again, I didn't eat any of the fruit here. I wouldn't necessarily call this version of Aurum Vale a bad dungeon. It has lost its teeth. And I think this leads to an overall discussion about dungeon design and difficulty in Final Fantasy XIV and what we expect the vast majority of people to be able to accomplish. Okay, let's get this straight. Aurum Vale was never some like pinnacle of game design that we all looked to as a lighthouse on a foggy day for guidance in terms of how to create a great and thrilling MMO dungeon. No one really looked at Aurum Vale like that. However, what I think Aurum Vale represents overall is a continued effort to double down on the homogenization of Final Fantasy XIV dungeons. This has been one of my least favorite elements of the game's direction over the course of the last, I was gonna say few expansions, but it feels like even more than that. It's been going on for so long at this point. I quite like a lot of the dungeons in A Realm Reborn because they actually feel different to each other, mechanically speaking. Some of them actually feel like adventures, or they produce some kind of interesting flow that the rest of the dungeons, especially of recent expansions, just fail to provide. It's like in Dawn Trail, I absolutely love the dungeon bosses, but the series of corridors that we get just connecting those bosses to each other that just boil down to wall-to-wall pulls repeatedly ad nauseum. Mechanically, it's dull, boring, and uninteresting. And I think it's really holding back dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV from being anything remotely compelling. They're never really any experiences that actually stick with you outside of like the occasional really cool story bit. But like mechanically, they're just kind of dull and they feel cookie cutter. And I don't think it's necessarily bad to have a gameplay identity, don't get me wrong. But when it feels like every dungeon just comes out of this plastic mold, I think they're no longer special and there's nothing really surprising that can come from them. Seriously, like, think back on it. When's the last time you ever looked towards a patch and went, dude, I cannot wait to do the dungeon, right? It's like, who thinks this? Dungeons, especially for the type of MMORPG that Final Fantasy XIV is, dungeons are one of the most beloved pillars of these games, and Final Fantasy XIV's is just so categorically dull. And I think what Aurum Vale represents is like one of the remaining holdovers, the dungeon that actually made you piece yourself and think and at least utilize 4 brain cells at least. Well, it had those elements scrubbed away just so it can feel like every other dungeon in this game now. It was never the most well-designed dungeon. I would never have called it one of my favorites, but it was memorable. And I think having dungeons and gameplay experiences that are memorable in a video game is an important feature for a video game. And there's always a part of myself in the back of my mind that's hoping that maybe when we get to like 8.0, they might try to diversify the gameplay experience we get in dungeons. But when you do something like Aurum Vale right here, that dashes any hope that I had, because if you were going to do that, you're going to be announcing 8.0 not too long into the future at FanFest. It wouldn't make sense to make Aurum Vale just feel like every other dungeon if you were going to change everything in the next expansion. So I just don't think they're going to do that. And I think it's a real shame because it makes dungeons just feel like glorified filler content. When back in A Realm Reborn, they didn't feel like that. They felt like unique experiences, little zones to explore that provided their own unique gameplay mechanisms that broadened the sandbox and gave you truly unique experiences that were memorable. Sunken Temple of Khan is a great example of this. That place felt like you were navigating ancient tombs. Aurum Vale felt like you were navigating this weird cave structure that filled and riddled with poison and spores because the mechanics of the dungeon lent itself to that atmosphere. But now they're so trivial to the point of non-existence that it doesn't matter. I think this is a step back design-wise. I think this makes the game, and especially this dungeon, a less memorable and a less engaging and a less fun experience. I think Dawntrail has brought to the table some of the most fun dungeon bosses this game has ever had. And I think a lot of people may remember the 7.3 dungeon. Now, quite a bit of pushback was brought to Square Enix because some people viewed it to be too difficult. It wasn't too difficult. In my opinion, that dungeon in 7.3 was one of their best pieces of work, mainly because of the fights, not because of the routes we took to get to the fights. But this goes back to something that Yoshi P talked about before Dawntrail even came out, and I think it was in an interview with Preach Gaming where Final Fantasy XIV kind of operated under the philosophical idea that they don't want to really upset anyone. And when you produce content that is too difficult, some people just can't do it. Sure, some people might get frustrated and they might talk about that frustration online or in forums. So a way to prevent that and to mitigate that is to just make everything like bog standard and easy. Sure, I get that. But if you make everything too easy and too homogenous, well, you don't produce an interesting or memorable experience. And I think that does a disservice to the game and its future design, because dungeons just feel like glorified filler. That's all they feel like, and they just feel like roulette fodder, to where they're not supposed to be fun, they're not supposed to be engaging, they're just a glorified time gate to get some tomes. And I don't think that's a healthy direction for the game. And I don't think it's been a healthy direction for the game up to this point, but they continue to lean into it, and I think that's continued to be the wrong decision. Make dungeons actually feel unique to each other, make them fun, make them interesting, and don't be afraid for them to be a little bit difficult. They don't have to be like little ultimate raids or anything like that, but they never have been. Don't be afraid to ask the player to learn and to adapt and to have a unique experience in the video game. Don't be afraid of people having the occasional wipe. Don't be afraid of people struggling a little bit, because it is through that struggle that memories can be made. And if everything feels the same and everything is just like bottom of the totem pole level of difficulty, nothing's memorable, and it just ends up feeling like glorified filler. It's just this slop that is shoveled out to everyone to feast upon that has no flavor, no texture, and for a video game, I don't view that to be a good thing at all. You know, the worst thing about this whole situation, that I'm pretty sure I know why they're doing this. They probably have some metric that shows like clear percentage between actually unique dungeons and slop dungeons, and the slop dungeons probably have a higher clear percentage, and it's probably a lot higher. So they go, oh, so people prefer this dungeon because they get it done quicker, and spreadsheet development will be the end of me. Maybe it's a little microcosm of a lot of, not just Final Fantasy XIV, but Square Enix's issues on the whole, and like they're not the only ones that probably develop games like this. But when you develop key pillars of your games to just be a glorified path of least resistance, and you are actively afraid and you borderline shun unique gameplay scenarios or instances because you want everything to feel and flow and to be the same, so that every dungeon has this exact same perceived value, I really do believe that it holds back the true potential that this game has. And it's weird because they take risks when it comes to the actual bosses, especially in Dawntrail when it comes to the dungeons. And the bosses have been absolutely amazing because they don't feel the same. They try different things and try to bring unique mechanics to the table, and that's really good. Can we have it extend to the rest of the dungeon though? And can we stop going back to dungeons that actually provide a unique gameplay experience and that are actually memorable, just to homogenize them and make them just another Final Fantasy XIV slop dungeon? Can we please stop doing this? I don't have high hopes, but maybe one day. Here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with what your favorite dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV is, and why is it the Vault? Because, I mean, come on, let's be honest here. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. But let's move the conversation to Square Enix on the whole, because they're going through a lot of changes, and it was revealed relatively recently that a certain someone is back in charge of Dragon Quest. We have quite a bit to talk about. Want to find out more? Well, you should check out this video right here for more. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.